Hey, welcome back to the Invest Success podcast. I'm Jim Edenfield, Invest Success, my partner and cohort, partner in crime, Tim Emery. And we got a very special guest today with us here. One of our favorite ladies. If you ever hear us talk anytime, you're going to hear us use this one phrase over and over and over. We tell you to find investor-friendly service providers. And this beautiful lady is one of our local title companies that they are investor-friendly. Miss Diana Smith.
Hi, how's everybody doing? I am Diana Smith with Elevated Title. I'm one of the owners, and I run the escrow department.
What does that mean?
So I run the department that actually does all your closings, gets it ready, gets it funded. I'm that person.
So as an escrow person, escrow officer, which we'll often hear, what are we as investors or real estate people looking for in an escrow officer? Or tell us kind of the details of what you look at and what your job is.
So, it starts with the contract. So what normally the situation is obviously it always depends on the type of deal, but most realtors, investors, when you get a deal under contract, you send it over to us. And the first things we do then are start making sure that who owns the property, does it match what's on contract, what liens are on title, and how quickly can we get those removed in order to close? In an investor case, you guys are always moving really quickly. So sometimes that's a challenge because title comes back and, there's 15 liens on it. Well, we can't close in 5 days now or less. But we end up being the ones that process through making sure you as the buyer get your title free and clear. You're going to be the owner of this house and you're going to have it without any liens to move forward. That is the very basis of it.
That really helps.
Yeah.
So interesting fact, I just had a contract I read yesterday for a property we have. Contract says that there's a box check because realtors and real estate agents are not allowed to practice law. So we're not allowed to write contracts. We're allowed to check boxes and fill in blanks. And the line says that the seller will pay for all closing fees or title closing fees.
That's a box, or it says it just flat out?
So this is in Alabama.
Oh, okay.
So this is in Alabama, and it says closer will, and it's a box check. And I sent back to him, because we're paying concessions, sent back to him, I said, hey, just change this box so it says that they're paying their half. And our agents are confused as to doing that. So do you check a lot of that stuff? And that's a lot of stuff.
So the very first thing we do is go through the contract. Generally, we won't really look at it too closely until we have a commitment because we need to match things up. It's hard to go just generally through it. But we do go through the contract to make sure the boxes are checked because it does tell us who pays for what. Like you said, contracts are legally binding. So an agent is working in a sense, you're not supposed to be a legal entity for your client, but kind of because you are responsible for that contract, But sometimes if you're a title company that doesn't work with investors very often, you don't like it when they make changes like that aren't normal, because it makes you have to think about it. From a perspective that we have, because we work with investors all the time, we know we have to look at the contract because you guys might put something in the special provisions. You might add an addendum, the boxes might be checked, the seller's paying for it, but then in the special provisions, it might say something like the buyer's paying all closing costs. So we know we have to check that you haven't offset it because that's how it is,
Being investor friendly, she is an investor.
That is right.
Tanya with the company used to be a wholesaler. She's an investor. You can't get legal advice, but I've heard you say that from time to time in reading that contract, she may go back to the buyer and go, have you read your contract?
Exactly. I can't tell you what to do. I can't give you advice as a legal counsel, but I can ask you a question. I can say, hey, Section 17 says, you're going to pay for this. Is that correct? Are you sure about that? That's me telling you, hey, take a look at it and be sure that that is how you want it to read. That's the best I can do to give you assistance. But a lot of times investors are like, yep. I'm like, okay. And then we go to closing. And they're like, hey, I was supposed to have X, Y, Z. I'm like, that's not what the contract says.
What does from a closing company standpoint or title company, what do you like to see from a real estate agent or investor side? What would be your ideal situation?
So what would be, the perfect type of email with the contract? You send over the contract, everything is checked. Every box is checked. Everything is done exactly as you want it to be done. And then in the email, you say, this property has an HOA. We'd like you to order all the documents. Here's the contact information. This seller has 3 payoffs. Here's the seller's phone number and email. Here's my phone number and email. As much information as possible so that we're not constantly, a lot of the times we're just waiting, for information. Everybody's like, oh, we're in a rush. I'm like, I need more information. And
it's not necessarily your job is to go request it. It's not your job to go chase it.
And when we have investor deals, especially, sometimes these properties are in foreclosures. Sometimes they're like a first and then they've done modifications. So they've got HUD partial DOTs. They are time consuming to get, and the seller must be involved. So a lot of those ones, they won't let you just order it on, it's a regular Rocket mortgage payoff. You just call it in and it comes over in an hour. It's not like that, so the more upfront you are about everything, the simpler it goes. And I do find sometimes that they like to play hide the ball a little bit. Everybody wants to be like kind of secretive. And just, from a title company standpoint, we don't care. We don't care if the seller's in jail. We don't care if the people are getting divorced. It doesn't matter. We're just trying to help us do our job to help you close. That's what we're trying to do. And so the more information you give us, I just had a conversation today with somebody about it. I was like, well, I'm like, is he in jail? They're like, yes. I'm like, okay, we'll send somebody there to do the closing. Oh, I'm like, it's not like you can't do it.
Can't surprise you.
Yeah. It's going to come out.
Right.
And the more you try to hide it, it makes me feel like something is amiss, right? Now I want to ask you lots of questions. And, so if you're more upfront with us, we're much more able to help you get to the end. And
that's another key. They're investors. They know what's going on. A lot of title companies, they're used to dealing with little Tommy and little Susie's first-time home buyer. They're not going to ask 100 of the questions that we're going to ask investors. So they just, it's cookie cutter, go.
Yeah.
As I've had closing agents at a title company kill a deal because they didn't understand the verbiage in the hard money arrangement or the creative financing. They start asking questions and the seller's like, or the buyer's getting, wait a minute, if they don't understand it, this has got to be crooked, it's got to be bad. They get up and leave.
Yeah.
So interview your title companies. If you can, if you're going to go, we always say, if you're an investor, pick one company, get to know that agent, try to have every deal through that agent. The seller usually gets to pick, but on every offer we go, we want to use our title company because we know them, we know they're going to protect us and you. General title companies, they may mean well, but they don't understand the investor's world.
Yeah. I mean, it gets, tricky. So what you see a lot of times when it's with a regular title company closer that doesn't do them is because like there's a listing agent involved who likes their closer, and they usually only do like regular cookie cutter deals, and they happen to get a deal that happens to be an investor special, and then nobody really understands how to move forward, and there's tons of questions.
And the same thing for realty agents. They just because they got that big giant R, they paid money to get that R. They don't understand creative finance. They don't understand the investing world. They can burn you and get you in a bad deal.
Let's talk about something that's kind of come up in the last 6 months, a year or so. There is YouTube videos all over the place talking about this new way of buying houses called Subject to.
Yep.
Which is actually not a new way of buying some properties. It's been going on for as long as I've been in the real estate business, if not longer, even longer.
They're just dressing up as the new Kool-Aid, the new shiny object.
But there are a bunch of things that have come out about the way Subject to is doing and the way people are doing it that have made it different. So as an expert, because I still I'm a little confused by it. So can you tell us more about the Subject to, what it is, how it works, and then what's right or wrong with it?
And the way to do it.
So, subject twos, people call them wraparounds. So I did them. They were called wraparounds when I did them before, back in 2007 and 2008.
Yeah.
And now it's a subject to. Same thing, not to be confused with a novation agreement.
Okay.
Let's put that out there. A little bit different. So a subject to essentially is I'm buying your house, Tim. You have a mortgage on it, 3%. Rates are currently at 7%. So I want to buy your house and assume your loan without actually assuming it.
Or telling the bank.
That's what I mean. So I'm not really I'm assuming it, but I'm not, because I'm not doing the process through the bank. So I buy your house. We agree on a dollar amount, and I now own it. But the loan stays on the property in your name.
The seller's name.
The seller's name. So that is the stickity wickety, is that it's staying in the seller's name and you haven't gone through the assumption process, of which only some loans are assumable. So, I know Pace Morbius has made, a huge thing about it, and he's selling it, and it's, from the buyer standpoint, it's a great deal, right? You get to buy a house with very little money at a low rate. But it's not a great deal for the seller.
Why
I mean, most of the time, no seller that has equity in the house that can sell it and it's a good house is doing it. It is going to be somebody that has to sell, right? They're in foreclosure. They've got all kinds of whatever the situation.
Distressed.
They are going to be distressed sellers. And let's take VA and FHA as the examples, which is actually the real issue. You know, all of these things are about the climate of the country. So when I was doing it back in 2007, 2008, it was no big deal. Nobody was worried about it. All title companies were doing it. There was no like hint of anything wrongdoing per se. Now come to 2024, 25, the government they had put out a statement memo back in 1978 saying that you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are you going to actually enforce it, right? It's not a law per se. Well, they have started enforcing it. And only way they can enforce it, because they can't go after the buyer since it's technically not illegal, is to hit the sellers, title companies, lenders, real estate agents. So what that means for the seller, you're a VA seller. They find out you've done a subject to, you lose your VA entitlement forever.
Okay.
So that means you sold this property subject to, VA finds out about it, and you want to buy a house 10 years from now, you won't have the entitlement. It's a big deal.
Okay.
FHA, title companies, the seller can be put on the ban list. And then also for title, lender, real estate agents, and the agent's brokerage, the FHA can blackball you from doing any deals for a year, for up to forever, depending on what they want to do. So you'll see that, at least in Colorado, I don't know of any title company that's still doing it.
Okay.
And they were all doing it up until probably the last year or so, year and a half. Because before we would just put it on the exceptions page. It wasn't covered anyways, so it wasn't even insured.
Right.
So title was like, well, we're not insuring it, so who cares? But now that FHA has come out with that, you know, and DORA has a whole thing about it. If you're an agent, if you go to the DORA site, the DORA information, they have a whole thing about what can happen if you do a subject to.
What about conventional loans?
So conventional loans don't have the same heat on it per se, because they're not governed by anything. That's going to be a per lender. Probably it would be okay.
So because FHA and VA are insured by the federal government, the federal government can say this about those loans.
That's right.
Conventional loans are not this way, but in reality, most of the loans that people are doing this with are FHA and VA loans because they're distressed sellers in a lower economic area that are having trouble.
But
so I would say
always do that due on sale.
Now, yeah, the banks could always do their due on sale clause, and that is true of all loans. Mm-hmm. So all deeds of trust have a due on sale clause, and deeding out of your name, even doing a quick claim from your name to say your trust, could be considered a violation of that clause. But lenders just don't care because you're making the payment, and if you say, you can prove to them that it's your entity, they'll leave you alone. Mm-hmm. But when you try to do it, and so people try to get around it by being like, I'll do it from the seller to the trust in the name of the property, like Crestline Trust. And I'll put the seller as the trustee, but myself as the beneficiary. Maybe that works.
Right.
But title's not going to take that risk,
Now, there is some exceptions to this in Colorado. If you have a lawyer draw it up and have, and I may be
close with the lawyer.
Here. You close with the lawyer?
Mm-hmm. There is a lawyer here, and I can't think of his name. I'm sorry, but he does do them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that you're actually getting title insurance, but I don't know that you would need it because you're not paying off the loan anyways, really.
Right.
But I can't speak to that well enough to know like exactly what you would get for as far as like a policy. I don't know if they're because I don't know if he's underwritten by somebody that's doing it, or if it's you have just a claim against the attorney.
Mm-hmm.
But there is an attorney in town that is doing it.
Okay.
We're talking about risk though, both the seller and the buyer at risk because I'm gonna sell you my house. You start to work, you invest $50,000 into the rehab. I declare bankruptcy. Guess what happens to the house? It's ripped out under you. Versus I sell it to her for $50,000. I'm happy. I'm good. She destroys the house, demos it, and goes, "This isn't working out," and walks away.
Yeah.
I've got a destroyed house, and I was already distressed.
Yeah.
Now my house is destroyed.
It is risky. Like, and I will say, for example, like when you have like sellers that are in foreclosure, if there's equity in the house, because I will say of all the ones I've done, there's very rarely much money that's going to the seller. I think the most I've ever seen is like maybe $5,000.
They're just escaping bankruptcy.
And or foreclosure, which honestly,
or could be bankruptcy.
I don't know that it really makes that much difference for the seller. So let's say that it goes to foreclosure, and a lot of times in these types of deals, if it was worth it to be a flip, you would buy it and flip it, right? So most of the time people are buying subject twos, they're buying them as holds.
And rental properties.
And maybe planning on flipping them at some point. And that's where I think you get a little bit of the concern in the sense of like, starts out great, 6 months goes by, you've got it rented, no problem. Renters stop paying. So now the buyer who bought it can't make the payments either, but it still affects the sellers because it's still in their credit. And there's no recourse other than to take the property back.
Right.
But now you've got to kick out tenants.
Yep.
I mean, there is a lot of risk, in this, because like I said, these are 90% of the time going to be buy and hold. Because if it was a flip, you would just buy it as a flip.
Yep.
Yep. And I find that, I'm not saying that you can't make money doing it. There's a lot of people probably doing it. But from my standpoint, I don't see that why it's a good deal for the seller. Because I'll tell you, if it goes to foreclosure and there is an overbid, let's say, somebody bids $200,000 and there's only, owed $185,000, the seller gets it. It's not like that money just goes away. The seller does get that overbid.
Right.
So maybe they'd be better off. I mean, they might not get anything true. They're going to get $2,500 and still have this outstanding.
Yeah.
So I just don't think it's generally a good deal for the seller. Right. That's my opinion.
And I think with the climate, and we'll see what happens now that we're in 2025, and the climate of the victim mentality that is going around Colorado right now, especially where legislature and city councils and stuff are trying to protect the little guy, and that's really where a lot of this stuff comes from. Is trying to protect the little guy that might be taken advantage of, and big government does not like to see people taken advantage of.
No, they don't.
So that's what's going on now. That could change with the new administration. Some of these things could go away or be not worried about. We'll see what happens in the next 6 to 8 months, but still, it's from my standpoint, I've never loved it.
Yeah.
I've never taught it. I don't teach it. I don't want to discuss it. If you're going to do that, I'll tell you to go find somebody else.
And there is a huge community of subject to people that you can find and talk to. I would just make sure, if you're the buyer, do your due diligence. Make sure that you really understand what you're getting to. If you're an agent, be very careful, because you are going to be at risk. A buyer, truly, there's nothing they can do to you as the buyer.
Right.
But, if you're putting money in, be careful of what you're, there's just risk, not as much for the buyer, but for the sellers.
There is some risk for the buyer.
There is.
I'm investing my rehab money now.
Well, and if the seller is smart enough to find the right lawyer, they can sue that buyer.
That's right.
I mean, everybody's suable in this market.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's where I think some of the risk is, and some of the big lawyers in town are looking for this.
Yeah.
And the legislators, whenever I go to a legislation meeting, go testify, there are plenty of lawyers and plenty of organizations there to help if something happened to you.
That's right.
So
I mean, they do like to help. They generally like, to help what they feel is the person that has least, is not the person that's expert. That's what I was trying to say.
Yep.
So, if you're the seller and you don't know enough people, there's always going to be somebody that's out there to help that person that they feel was taken advantage of, if that's the case.
Yep.
Well, I hate to, but we're running out of time. But
okay.
If you're an investor, like I say, you get to pick your title company. One of the ones we love is Tanya, Diana, and Tammy with Elevated Title. So tell them they can find you at Elevated Title.
So we are located at 8480 East Orchard Road, Suite 4000, Greenwood Village. We're right next to, we're in the building right next to Del Frisco off I-25 in Orchard. It's really easy. Phone number is 720-734-2767. And you can email the A-team at elevatedtitleco.com. We'd love to see you guys.
They are the A-team, I tell you.
That's right.
We do a lot of events out with them and Invest Success. We do happy hours, and they sponsor a lot of happy hours. We do sporting events, which is we're talking about doing another Rockies game for our third year. So, Tanya,
try to have it be warmer this year.
We're going to pick a warm one. We like to froze our butts off last time.
Yes,
we're good. We got a Rockies game coming up. These great ladies are great to hang out with.
That's right. And We'd love to have you.
Speaking of hanging out, we've got the John Fisher's Breakfast Club. It's been going on for 20 years. Second Saturday of every month at 7 a.m. If you think that's a little hard to get up to, we have 2 happy hours. This month is actually hosted by Elevated Title down south. The third Wednesday of the month, we're going to do one down south. The first Wednesday of the month, we're doing it at Rhino Brewing Company in Rhino. Blue Moon.
Blue Moon.
Let me say that again. Blue Moon Brewing Company in Rhino, first Wednesday of the month. And Tim and I, we actually host a coaching and mentorship program where we meet 3 times a month. Every other Monday night, we meet in the house that's going through an active rehab that belongs to our students. On the last Saturday month, we go out and do a property tour. We tour 2 houses. We teach you, first house, 2 hours, how to go in that house, develop a realistic ARB, after repair value, a realistic rehab budget. I need more coffee. And then we go to the second house, and you've got 15 minutes to walk out and come out with your numbers, and we'll discuss it. 12-month program. We're very hands-on, one-on-one. We do coaching calls every week. We're a phone call away, a text or email all throughout the week. First class is completely free. Go to invest-success.com, and top right-hand corner is a button, join class for free. If you're interested in joining our program, our 12-month program or our 90-day program, because you've stuck with us to the end, we're offering a 2K special. Just say, Jim, I want to join your program, and I want to save $2,000, and we'll get you going. Thank you, Diana, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And go out and do a deal.